Matt Finch is joining me to talk a bit about not only Swords and Wizardry. There's something really cool going on right now on Kickstarter about that, but we're going to talk a bit about role-playing games as well as what is OSR, because I know a lot of people have questions about that as well. So first of all, I believe a lot of people like to refer to you as Uncle Matt. But,
yeah.
So welcome aboard, Matt.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And first of all, if people aren't real familiar with your work, you have been writing RPG material for quite some time. I know a lot of people are probably familiar with the Cyclopean Deeps campaign that you've done in the past as well. I know that was very well received. How about a little bit of your bona fides? Let's talk a little bit about what you've done in the industry.
Okay. Well, I mean, the first thing out of the box, just from being, complete amateur at the whole thing was writing Osr Is, which a lot of people know about, a lot of people don't. It's a retro clone, people call it, of first edition advanced D&D.
Right.
And by retro clone, we mean something that is, because I'm an attorney by trade, and the issue is violating copyrights on things that were written by TSR.
Right.
And there was a large community of people who were writing stuff for advanced D&D, and there were copyright violations all over the place. And so what Osr Is was basically an SRD that tapped into the system reference document, which tapped into the open game license, the existing system reference document for third edition, the fact that you can't copyright rules, and then it was basically a rewriting of the rules of first edition completely from scratch, which would allow that to come out in the open game license.
Kind of in layman's terms, too, a lot of people don't realize that an SRD is essentially all the artwork stripped out, a lot of the fluff is stripped out. So you're basically looking at a book full of rules and mechanics.
Yep, exactly right. I mean, it's like the treasure chest that's involved with the game, and then the open game license is the key. If you're using the open game license, then you're able to unlock that chest and use the things that are in there. So it actually could contain art. It's just that nobody has ever done one that
right. I
contains
was going to say, I'm not familiar with any that do.
No, I don't think there is one.
So you had Osr Is, and what else have you done, Matt?
Well, and there's Swords and Wizardry, of course, which I guess we'll talk about later.
Yep.
Wrote a book called wrote a little piece called the Quick Primer for Old School Gaming, and a lot of people have seen that.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, when people start talking about what's old school gaming, a lot of times they get referred to that. Written a book called Tome of Adventure Design, which is pretty well received out there. It's one of Frog God's best sellers, actually, which is just a set of tables, but they're not really just random generation tables. A lot of them are heuristics where you, if this, then, go to here.
Right.
So that's out there, and that's intended for deep adventure design rather than use at the table, because if you're using these things, it's a long process to get the stuff, but that's out there. Bunch of adventures: Pod Caverns of the Sinister Shroom, Rogues of Rembalo, Grimsgate, just a whole lot of modules, Spire of Iron and Crystal, and then I'm starting to draw a blank. I've written a lot of other things out there. Campaign settings, Borderland provinces, Atlas of Secrets of Jordiba. You get to a point where when you get asked, what have you written, you're like, okay, here we go.
Right, sure. So let me jump back in time and ask, how did you get involved in tabletop gaming?
Oh, you mean way back?
Yeah.
Okay, well...
what was your first introduction, I guess we'll say?
Well, my first introduction to it was... when I was really, really young, I guess about 10, I was really interested in the Napoleonic Wars, and so that got me into hobby shops where people sold miniatures for Napoleonic War gaming. And during the course of time when I was there, I noticed that there was this book called The Monster Manual that was out on the shells, and that was cool. And so I looked through it. It had, descriptions of things like ogres, and I was, enough into wargaming that I was sort of getting what was going on here, but I didn't understand it was a game because I was a kid and games came in boxes. And then eventually they put out the first basic set for Dungeons and Dragons, and that was in a box. So I understood this. Now I've got a handle on what's going on here. So I got that, and started playing with a couple of friends. Sorry, my dog is making noise in the background.
That's okay.
Started playing with a couple of friends, and from there I understood what was going on in these books and got the books, and we started playing. So it was about it had to be about 1978 because that's when that box set came out.
Right.
So.
I am right in pretty much the same wheelhouse. So
okay. There are a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. And I tell this story on the show every once in a while. I don't regale people with it constantly, but I found myself in a local hobby shop that was down the street from my grandmother's house. So I walked in because I used to go in all the time. They had slot cars and, and so
people don't understand necessarily even what a hobby shop is, what we're talking about.
Not anymore. They used to have, plastic models of all the various different cars and planes and tanks and all different stuff. So they had a little section where they had Dungeons and Dragons, and I thought, well, what is this? This looks kind of cool. I was looking at G1, and I thought, oh wow, this is pretty neat. I'm going to buy it, thinking that was the game.
Game. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you went the other direction. You bought the book, but it was the wrong book. I couldn't figure out that the books were a game until I saw a box.
I got the module and I got home and I'm like, I don't get this. So we're
it was all
kind of around the same time.
1978. It was all very unclear what was going on.
So what inspired you to start writing material for role-playing games?
Well, I think like almost anyone in the industry, you get this sort of warning that they were going to become game people because when I would write an adventure, I would draw a terrible little picture on the front of it and do that little cross-hatched banner on the side where I would give it a number and a letter, just like G1, it would have some sort of letter on it, and just trying to sort of mimic the look of what was going on out there. And then really I wrote one adventure when third edition D&D came out, and you remember there was a big thing about, now you can publish stuff using Dungeons and Dragons. So I wrote one thing for that, but I really didn't get started on it until Osric. So that would have been 2000, writing in 2005, came out in 2006. The retro clone for that. Up until then, I had just been one of a bunch of people who, after third edition, ended up on a forum called Dragon's Foot, where it was just where people who kept playing the older versions of the games hung out.
Right.
And so, and I was just there, talking around with people until I came out with this. And then at that point, I sort of slowly worked my way into it because I did that, and then I was like, okay, I'm done. And then I wrote Swords and Wizardry, and I was like, okay, I'm done. And then after that, as it turns out, you're never done.
Right.
It's like it sucks you back in. So
it's a never-ending cycle.
It really is.
I know.
Because then all of a sudden you're like, I've got this new idea. Oh crap! It's gonna have to get.
You can't just let it go. It's like, I got to see this through to the end.
Absolutely, and that's the way it works. And I guess the other relevant thing is that in 2010. When I hooked up, we set up Frog God Games to have the Swords and Wizardry, but also to be publishing Pathfinder stuff that they were doing. So that was sort of a benchmark thing, but it didn't have to do with the writing so much as it was just that's when things got kind of formalized, and I was like, okay, I'm officially a writer now, instead of somebody who writes stuff.
I'm an author, not a writer.
Exactly. There you go.
Let's talk a little bit about old school renaissances, I like to call it. I know a lot of people refer to it as old school revival. See, I like fancier words. That's why I throw renaissance in there.
I'm also one of the old school renaissance people, so we're talking the same language here.
Cool deal. I thought we would. So let's kind of explain it to folks out there who don't understand what OSR is. And I know a lot of people out there think OSR is just a bunch of old folks who are extremely conservative in their political views and crazy, crazy right-wing stuff. And all it basically is old school Renaissance is we like the way the game's played back in the 70s, early 80s, as opposed to all of this plot-driven stuff that we see nowadays. Am I pretty close on the money there, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, first off, people who are in the OSR, like any fan group, will disagree, vehemently about what exactly is in and what's out and so on. I mean, my take on it is that it was the community that got started on Dragon's Foot, which was just a bunch of people who played the original games, and then it becomes kind of a publishing description, a description of a publisher,
right?
And that's another reasonable place to put it. It's that's just whether you're looking at the community or whether you're looking at whether it's a publishing thing or not. But I think what it centers around is exactly what you said. It's people who like games that operate in the style of the early days of gaming. And some of that is definable and some of it's not. So, I mean, my definition of what is an old school game is that it's something where the rules are relatively open-ended.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not complex, because first edition D&D is just about as complex and bizarrely intertwined and complicated game as you can imagine. But the thing is, it still tended not to tell you you can do this, and this with your character. It's just that it had a bunch of bizarre, rules like, weapons, speed factors, and things like this that many people ignored, and they're complex, but they don't close off various possibilities in the same way that, for example, third edition gave you a very clear set of you can do this, and this, and it was a lot like a pawn that you simply were moving around.
Correct.
And performing certain actions with the characters, and whereas if you house ruled something, there was a good possibility that law of unintended consequences, you were going to screw up something somewhere else in the game. Whereas the older school type stuff tend to be a lot more modular. It's easy to tweak and house rule and so on and so forth, and so that's an element to it as well. I think it's it's really, really vague. You ask any two people about what the OSR is, and you'll get three opinions.
Of course, just like a lot of people sit there and they talk about, Dungeon Crawl Classics, that's not OSR, and other people say, oh yes it is, and oh no it's not, and it's like, okay, relax, it's just a game.
And it's like any fan base. I mean, what is the true Star Wars canon?
Exactly. Nobody knows anymore.
Yep.
So one aspect of OSR that you're intimately familiar with is Swords and Wizardry. And Swords and Wizardry kind of is a retro clone, as you've mentioned before. And it goes back to the old, as I like to say, B/X Dungeons and Dragons, as opposed to, say, first edition D&D.
Well, it actually goes even further back than that.
Does it go original?
It's
OD&D?
Yeah, it's the original white box set or wood grain box set.
That's
depending.
Right, the brown box.
Right,
Some people like to refer to it.
Right, and so it's that plus the supplements that came out for that, plus articles that were in the Strategic Review and the Dragon magazine, up until 1978 when Advanced Dungeons and Dragons comes out. So it actually predates even the stuff when you and I started playing the game. It's before that, and so that. So that's where it falls. If you do a timeline of when D&D was, I really apologize for the dog.
Oh, it's okay.
If you do a timeline, it's the absolute earliest iteration of Dungeons and Dragons.
All under one roof. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas original Dungeons and Dragons, we had various different books that would come out, and they were all kind of digest sized. I actually had brown box and I had white box. which I don't know why I did. I had chainmail too. I was one of these kids who's like, just getting everything.
You need to look at your brown box and see whether it mentions Balrogs and hobbits as opposed to Baelors and halflings. Because if it talks about Balrogs and hobbits,
It's worth something.
sell it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have any of this stuff anymore. I wish I did. I wish I did. I have a pretty large game collection. Seeing I'm a reviewer in that, I've been covering the hobby for 10 years and playing for over 40. But I don't have any of those old, the old original. Like I had the original Traveler box set and all those other goodies. The original Car Wars in its little Ziploc bag. But as far as Swords and Wizardry, let's talk a little bit about, because a lot of people, when they look at retro clones, they're kind of confused about what's going to set something up as being different than the others. And sometimes it could be as little as just the presentation of the rules, such as, say, like old school Essentials, is trying to clean things up so it's much more understandable to a modern reader, as opposed to, say, the old Avalon Hill gamers out there.
Right. I mean that one's in the arc of I think it's BX.
I think it's BX.
That's BX, and then there's Labyrinth Lord, which was a retro clone done on that, and then there's Old School Essentials. A lot of times you have a sort of family trees on these things going back. So
sure. Now, one thing you had also mentioned was OSR is used as kind of an advertising or marketing kind of statement, especially on like drive-through RPG. And it's kind of funny how upset people will get if a game adventure is marketed as OSR and it's not. They get really bent out of shape. So let's talk a little bit.
That's kind of because OSR is. I mean, it's an identifier for a particular type of gaming. It's a huge, broad mass, but it is people being like, this was kind of advertised to me as being one thing and it's another. But,
right. If it turns out to be like a 5e adventure and you're like, wait a second, why did this say OSR on it?
Right.
So there's really no rubber stamp of this is what OSR is. So let's talk a little bit about the new Kickstarter that you've got for Swords and Wizardry. So you're looking at, I believe when this hits, it should have about 16 days remaining on the Kickstarter. I know it's over 550% funded as of this moment. It is a box set, and it looks very, very sweet. And the first thing I do want to also mention before we kind of dive into that is anyone out there who wants to dip their toes into Swords and Wizardry, I think it's awfully cool that you can get the core book, pay what you want, which effectively is absolutely free.
Yeah, and let me jump in on that because I'm still talking to John Barnhouse, who's the partner in Frog God, who put that up on there. It is not pay what you want; it's free. Please
that's right. Okay, yes.
Do not pay
anything
for it. It's not supposed to be pay what you want. It's supposed to just be free out there.
But it does say pay what you want because I don't think Drive-Thru RPG has a way to just say free.
Yeah, I don't know, but we don't want it. We don't want it's nice to throw a tip in the jar for somebody who's got something that's pay what you want. Please don't. It's intended as being free for anyone to use. Don't feel any guilt about putting in zero on that. So.
And I honestly think there's actually a little notation on the Drive-Thru RPG page that says, "Please note, this is free." Don't pay anything for it.
Yeah, no, it might be. That's what we're trying to get it out there. It's, we want as many. We don't want to cut off any access to the game for anybody. Based on financial stuff or whatever.
Right,
it's
sure.
We want people to be able to play it. A lot of people, that's just fine. A PDF is what they use to play in the first place.
Sure.
So
let's talk a little bit about the box set because, as you had mentioned previously, games come in boxes. So let's talk a little bit about what folks could expect with the box set for Swords and Wizardry that is currently up for crowdfunding.
Okay, so in terms of what's in the box, the gaming content in the box is not new. This
No.
is the same content that's in the Swords and Wizardry complete rulebook, which we are running out of. And since we're running out of them, we've said, all right, well, let's sort of redo the look and the feel that's behind this, get something that's cool. We'll start publishing new modules for it. We'll start publishing supplements for it. What should it look like? And I drew on my past experience from 1978 that a game ought to come in a box, or it may not be clear what it is.
Right.
And so, we decided to go for a box set.
And these are going to be digest-sized books, correct?
Yes.
Kind of as a
just
throwback, right?
Exactly.
So as far as new content, is there some stretch goals as far as some new content? Is there any new content that's going to be included in the box?
Yeah, there won't be that's in the box. I mean, it'll have some dice and it'll have some little character sheets in there.
Okay.
But the new content is in there. There is new content in terms of the stretch goals. It's not all of that is aids for gaming. So it's like, here's a PDF of the magic user's spells, so that if you want to, you can have that if you're a magic user just there in front of you without having to have a big book open. A lot of things like that.
Sure.
Where the real new stuff is in what's called an extras pack. And apparently we got some confusion on the Kickstarter that some places it's called an accessories pack and some places it's called extras pack. But it's there is a brand new DM screen, one of the lower height ones that's very long, so that you can see over it more easily and surround your books without
as opposed to hiding behind it. Like, hey, what are you hiding back there? What's going on there?
Yeah, you're not doing the whole thing like that with it. It also has a new module in it called Baron's Gambit, which is one that I'm writing right now.
Okay.
And that, again, will be a digest-sized type of thing. And then it also has a monsters book, and that either is or is not new content, depending on whether you got a copy of the great big book called Monstrosities that we sold a long time ago, that is so big that it's not reprintable anymore. And so there are going to be additional monsters. They are from that book, so it might or might not be new, depending on whether you're a long-term fan or not. If you're a brand new fan, it's new.
Okay, excellent. So as far as the dice that are going to be included in the box, are they going to be those really like cheapo, crappy dice, and you're going to toss in a really cheap wax crayon? So
I wish
you can fill them in.
I wish those were for sale anywhere, because that would be awesome. But what it is it's just basic dice. But it's nice to have them. It's nice to have them in your box. It makes the box rattle so that you've got a game in there, and that's really just a sort of it wouldn't be complete if it didn't have some dice in it. But there's nothing particularly unusual about those dice.
I have to laugh. My best friend, who I've been best friends with for, about 37 years now, he still actually has a couple of his original cheapo, crappy polyhedron dice that came in the box. So I can't believe he's still got them. And he keeps them in his, Crown Royal bag like most of us keep our dice.
Yeah, no,
most of us old-timers.
There, for example, is the Crown Royal bag.
There you go.
Filled with dice. Those. It's funny too, because some of them become almost spherical because the edges wear away.
Sure, right. They almost become like little round stones that you can throw at people as opposed to rolling dice.
They'll roll forever at this point. Yeah.
Right. Any final thoughts that you want to share about either Swords and Wizardry, the Kickstarter? Actually, one question I'll have before we do that. What is it about Swords and Wizardry that you feel really sells the system to newcomers to role-playing games, or newcomers to an old-school vibe to role-playing games?
Well, I mean, I actually think it's a good introduction for a beginner for role-playing games, although when people ask whether their kids ought to start with it, I'm like, no, start them with 5th edition, because that's what all of their friends play.
Right.
But at conventions, we've had a bunch of people, latch onto the whole concept of RPGs from it. It's simple to learn, which is, somebody who's been playing for a long time. That's not really a huge selling point. Your issue is much more, what's the feel of the game when it plays, how fast does it move, but it's also just, by accident, because there aren't a whole lot of rules to it, it's easy to learn. It's easy to pick up what's going on there. And most people nowadays, of course, they already also are starting with a basic knowledge because they've seen Skyrim out there, they've seen The Witcher out there, they've got the basic idea of how these games work. And so here it is in writing, and simply there are not a whole lot of words compared to, here is a modern system where this book is the one that you want to read and assimilate before you can sit down at the table and roll some dice. In this one, it's a few pages of it, and it's because the book contains, it also has, the monsters, the DM section, the section that the players need to read is very, very small.
Right.
So
very cool. If I remember correctly, isn't the turnaround on this Kickstarter going to be pretty quick?
I know, actually, these are going to be produced in China. So it's going to have it's already written. A lot of the stuff that slows down a Kickstarter is already done for this one.
Sure. But
it is going to be produced in China. So there is going to be that lag time of, I think it's about 3 months.
That's when I say quick turnaround, because I cover so many board games. A lot of times the turnaround on a board game Kickstarter is a year. So when I say, this is supposed to be out like in the fall, to me, that's a quick turnaround.
Yeah, no, it will be considerably less than a year.
Right. So you are shooting for before the end of the year, correct? If I remember correctly from the Kickstarter.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would have to check and find out what exactly Zach filled in, because I'm not the logistics guy.
Exactly.
But it's in terms of RPG Kickstarters, it's not going to be super fast because it's not printed in the U.S. But for something that's coming from China, it's relatively, it's a fairly simple thing to assemble, and it'll be, definitely less than a year.
Excellent. All right, now I can ask Matt: are there any final thoughts you'd like to share with the viewers about, like I said, OSR or Swords and Wizardry? Frog God Games, anything like that?
No, I think the only thing is that, if people are looking at the OSR with, because you're absolutely right. It's been portrayed on the internet as if it's a cabal of old white guys who are together, because they are old white guys, and that's not what it is. It's about, a particular style of play. And I think I would just share the fact that it is a different style of play. You get you could be somebody who plays 5th edition and try out Swords and Wizardry and find that it is much more than just a simpler version of 5th edition. What it is because it's simpler, it creates, as an emergent phenomenon, it creates a very different feel in the game that's very, very distinct, even though, and yet it is really quick to learn because you already know how to play it. You've learned a more complicated version of it, so you can pretty much pick it up instantly, but discover that, there is something very different here. It's got more orientation on puzzles, more exploration involved, simply because there's time for those. You don't have to budget the time, so much for combat. So I would suggest that it's something that you will be fairly familiar with, but at the same time, it manages to be completely different.
Right. Fantastic. Matt, thank you so much for taking some time out today to talk a little bit about OSR as well as Swords and Wizardry and the new Kickstarter that is running right now.
And I really appreciate your asking me to be on the show. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Oh, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel by clicking right here. And of course, if you want to catch up on past episodes of The Daily Dope, check out this playlist. And if you'd like to see what YouTube's recommending you take a peek at from the channel, just give a click right over here. Of course, I'm Jeff McAleer, and once again, thank you very much for watching.